Do you have paper scraps that you'd really like to use, but you just don't know where to start and you get overwhelmed whenever you look at maybe a giant box full of scraps or a bag of scraps, or maybe you have them neatly organized in folders, but it feels like there's so much to use, you're not sure where to start. Well, let's talk about how we can fight the scrap overwhelm. Hey guys, it's Beth. Welcome back. Like I said, today I wanted to talk about scrap overwhelm, scrap paper overwhelm, whatever you want to call it. So I have big bags of scraps, and I maybe separate some by season or holiday or theme, but then I have a big bag of just general paper scraps, and it's intimidating. It's intimidating to look at the whole bag and think, oh my gosh, I'm never going to use that up. Like, how am I going to do that? Where do I even start? So I wanted to talk about a few ways that I like to get started on scraps, like a few ways that we can break it down a little bit and maybe make it less overwhelming for us, for ourselves, and actually get those scrap papers used up. So one way to start, and this is what I did last weekend when we went camping, and I always like to take some kind of little craft with me to the camper because there's always, lately in the spring, it rains, storms every weekend. So like we have downtime when we're just hanging out inside. So I took scraps, and I decided not to take all of my scraps because no way could I take all that along. So what I did is I went through and I picked out, I had started with a couple of patterns that I just thought would be fun to use. I think I had pulled out like that navy, and then I don't remember which other one there was another I had pulled out this gold, and then I pulled out things that might work with it. So I pulled out some tans and browns and some creams. I pulled out some reds and some other navies, and just things that I thought might coordinate with these colors, not necessarily all together, but just to give myself a starting point. So I took all those scraps, and then I kind of figured out what sizes I had, and I just started making card mats. I didn't really have any embellishments with me. I wasn't really focused on finishing the cards. I just kind of wanted to give myself a place to start. So I had a lot of strips. A lot of my scraps come from Silhouette Project leftovers, and that's because usually if I'm making cards, I try and use up all that paper as I'm using it. So a lot of the scraps I have either been kind of left around and tucked away for years, or they're left over from projects that I've used on my Silhouette. And I have a scrap box right next to my Silhouette machine, and I usually just toss the scraps in there. So I have a lot of the same size, and a lot of them are strips. So I did a lot of card mats where I pieced together, I don't know if you can see the seam there very well, my camera will focus, but I pieced together a lot of mats using these strips. And then sometimes I came in and would pull out another scrap strip to cover the seam where they met. And then in this case, I did go ahead and kind of embellish the front with some other coordinating scraps. So in this burgundy, I think this burgundy was another one that I had pulled out kind of to focus on. And so the gold went with it. This time I paired it with a brown. Here's one of the creams that I had pulled out. And this one is two of the same patterns kind of pieced together, but it's a busy enough pattern that you don't necessarily notice that there's a seam there, especially since I have most of the card covered up with this cream square. And then I just kind of used one of the brown pieces that I had brought in. This one I haven't really done anything with, but I used 3 pieces to create the card mat. I thought, I had pulled out this gold to kind of coordinate with the burgundy. Here's that yellow that I had pulled out. It actually worked well with the burgundy too, so I paired those together, brought in kind of a creamy brown square. This one, I just kind of layered up a bunch of things. That yellow that I had pulled out to work with one of the yellows, and then a tan, kind of a neutral pattern, and then just brought in a brown and another kind of cream. There's that burgundy and gold combination again, burgundy and then tan, and then this is actually kind of like a reddish, like a burgundy-ish brown, that big square. So I thought that worked okay. Yellow and brown works together, and then just added a white piece, kind of a white pattern on top. More of the burgundies and tans. This one I just kind of added a couple different scrap pieces, same with this one on the front. So you can see, like, I pulled out a few patterns that I wanted to start with, and then that kind of gave me something to base the scraps I wanted to use. So I wasn't sitting down looking at my entire scrap bag. I was just sitting down looking at a pile of scraps that all coordinated together in some fashion. And so that kind of just helped me see more what I had and get a game plan on how I could potentially use them up. So here was a pretty green that I just paired with a cream. That navy, this is kind of like a linen pattern. Another one of those. This time I did 2 creams, like just a solid cardstock and a pattern. This one, I had pulled 2 pieces of gray out to go with like the navies, but I didn't have a card mat to put it on, so I did have one card base, or a couple card bases with me. So this one I put directly on a card base, and then just added a strip of red to kind of give it a pop of color. This one I just used a bunch of gray patterns that I had and went ahead and put it directly onto a card base. This one is a cream pattern, and then layered up a couple different scraps. So it really helped giving myself a place to start with. And then when I came home, I did for the Smash Our Stash collab, it was focused on embellishments. And so I took some of these card mats that I had used scraps to make up, and then added some embellishments. And I kind of used random bits from my stash, just trying to use them up. But, you know, at least using those scraps, I already had kind of a base to decorate. So that's one way to look at it. So you can just pull out some patterns that you think might be fun to use, and then find some coordinating patterns or colors to go with that, and then work off of that. Another way to do it is maybe you have a theme that you're wanting to work on. So I don't have my Christmas scraps over here, but let's say we wanted to work on Christmas. So I would go through my scraps and maybe pull out anything that was in a red or green or stars or things like that. So that's another way you can look at it, is kind of based on a theme, and then pull out pieces that coordinate around that theme that you want to work on. Or you could start with some embellishments and then say, okay, I want to use up these flowers. Let's find some patterns that might work with the pinks and the browns in that paper. So, you know, you get the idea. You could just go through, find some scraps that coordinated, maybe, you know, pull out some browns and some pinks and some whites, and then you could build a card off of that. So that's kind of my third option, maybe. And here's what I managed to come up with off camera to use these flowers and those scraps. I did find a brown card mat I had already cut from my stash, and just used 2 of the strips of colors that kind of coordinated with the stickers, layered them on some white cardstock and stamped hello at the bottom, and then did use up some of the scraps in the inside. And then on this one I went with the polka dots and like that pink and orange floral, This is an A2 size. This one is 3.5 by 5 because I had a bunch of them sitting on my desk. And then this was just kind of a die cut square that I had like another one of those random bits, and then used the last two little flowers along with a Merci sticker. And then I felt like it needed something over here on this orange square, and so I just brought in some little white flowers in a similar shape, and then used pops of color in soft pink to add a center to the flowers. And then that used up the whole flower set, and it used up a handful of coordinating scraps. Or I do like to challenge myself from time to time on doing scrapbook pages from scraps. So maybe I know this is a trip to the Children's Museum, and so maybe I want to pull out some bold colors, like maybe primary colors that would work on, work with these pictures talking about, a trip to the Children's Museum. So I could look for oranges and maybe reds. Purple. Now, I'm not saying I would use all these together. I'm just saying it gives me a place to start from if I pull out all of the patterns that I would want to use that might work. Then I can say, okay, well, let's see which of these actually coordinates together, and maybe we can build a page off of, using scrap. And I did off camera make some pages with the superhero fun at the Children's Museum, the pictures I had pulled out, and some of the scraps that I had pulled out that might work. And so I went back through and found a few more scraps in colors that I thought would go well together. And then just used the scraps on the pages. So I have two pages that are very similar because I had two sets of the scraps. So I had two corner pieces of this black and white polka dot, and so I just kind of tore it and added it at the top, brought in like a square of that burgundy kind of and tan stars, the yellow, because I had pulled out like a yellow, this was like a sunshine pattern, and so I liked the white kind of sunburst type of stripes, and so I had that down here, and then a big stripe of that burgundy with the stars, and then more of the black and white polka dot. And really the colors that I had, I just wanted the colors to kind of go through the whole page. So whatever colors or patterns I used on the bottom, I also wanted to bring in the top, and vice versa. And then I did bring in a little scrap of white to do some journaling on. And then I had used a page of superhero stickers, and so I used some of the stickers on this page, and then I did print my title from my silhouette. I went into the design studio and created and printed my title, and then just added some red stars that I already had die cut. So here's a similar version of that page, just kind of flipped because of the orientation of this piece, this black and white corner piece. That kind of determined which side of the page it was going to go on. Again, I had similar patterns that I could pull through, but different size scraps in this first page. So this time that yellow and white sunburst is a little bit bigger than the red with the stars. And then I have the black and white polka dot. Again, the little journal spot down here. And then on this one, this was the first one I did actually. And so there was a superhero sticker on that sticker sheet. And so I used that as my title along with that cute little girl. I brought in some die cut and punch stars that I already had in my stash. And then I thought I was going to use these little Superman medallions, but I decided to save them because I actually have some Halloween or some dress up and Halloween pictures that I think those would be better for. So that's why I kind of switched on this one to just using that little girl superhero stickers. So this is the third variation. So I have one for each of my daughters and one for my album. And I had gone into my silhouette to create and print my title, and I found a little superhero girl, kind of like Wonder Woman, very similar to the little sticker. And she didn't, color-wise, she didn't print very well for some reason, but I decided she would still work with my page. So I have similar patterns on here. I had found one strip of this pattern that had like all of the colors I had really wanted to use. The red, the yellow, the black and white, and then, you know, this pulled in some green, blue, and orange and tan. So I had found some, like in my other, in the scraps that I had pulled out, I kind of went through and figured out if this was my last page that I made. So of what I had left, what was a similar size. So like I measured my smallest piece and that determined the size of the squares over here. Since I had 4 photos, I had kind of decided I would trim them down to 4x4 and do a grid, and then it just kind of used my scraps over here on the side. And so that's why I just measured the smallest one, figured out I could get 2.5-inch squares out of all of my remaining scraps and just cut them in squares to make a grid. Added my journaling with the sticker on one, just added some stickers here, and then my little printed die cut girl there. And then up here, I just used this strip to kind of be a landing spot for my title. And then I added some stars to this piece just to kind of tie it in to the rest of the page. So I pulled out some scraps that worked together and managed to use up a big handful of scraps and got 3 scrapbook pages made. Don't dismiss your scraps just because you don't think it's worthy of a bigger project. So I just feel like these are ways that help you go from, say, and this is actually a smaller bag because I took my big bag of general scraps and separated out by size. So this is really just kind of like the longer pieces. So you could go from a bag like this down to some, you know, a usable pile of scraps to use. And then if you use card sketches, you could go through and look for, say, card sketches that use strips or card sketches that use smaller rectangles. And, you know, I might be able to pair these together on a card. So like I said, it just kind of narrows the scope down for you and gives you an easier place to start and create from. If you guys have any tips on how to work through scraps, like good ways to start, I would love to hear those, as I'm sure others would as well. So please share any tips that you have on working with scraps, or maybe any kind of method that you have to work through your scraps, and we can kind of all figure out good ways to finally use up some of those scraps that we might have hanging around. So hopefully this was helpful. If you have any questions off this, please let me know. And like I said, if you have any tips, please let me know in the comments below. But I thank you guys so very much for your time today and hope you all have a very crafty day.